Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and we're back again. We're back again with, I think, an epic stream because anytime we're talking about this alternative financial system, one that is built on the founding principles of crypto with a leader like Richard Hart and this ecosystem at this time on this day, which happens to be election day here in the United States. What an unbelievable time. If you've been in the US, you have been literally completely whipsawed by all of this spending that's happened on all the messaging, trying to get you to be convinced to vote one way or another. And of course, we know that it's out of our hands in some respects at this point. But if you're somebody that's in the US, please, please, please get out there and vote. It is absolutely critical and fundamental and could affect your financial future. So I'm really excited about this stream. We got two guests today that we're going to be bringing on. If you caught the stream from the courthouse steps, you know that AxisALive is incredible. And he was inside the courtroom and has, I think, he's just a brilliant guy who has broken down, his perspective of seeing the attorneys firsthand. And I think that is such deep insight that he shared on those streams. There was like 10,000 views across those two streams. I mean, 1,600 people on the first one, 2,100 on the second one. It had an incredibly far reach. So many people are interested because the implications of what does it mean for this case with Richard Hart? What does it mean? And that's what we're going to really break down. But the other guest is Danny Spencer. And Danny's the one you have to thank, in my opinion, because he's the one that put together the amicus brief. He's the guy who literally went to all the trouble, did all the research. He has literally been in the weeds. And obviously, Crypto Coffee and other people have helped promote that. But close to 50,000 signatures were made on that amicus brief that was submitted to the court. So there's a lot that we're going to be talking about today. I really encourage you to share this out. People need to know. So if you got Twitter, you've got whatever means possible, I'd encourage you to share this out with the folks. This is going to be, I think, really insightful. Then towards the end, I know we're going to be talking to Axis about some things that he's got going on, but also some things related to hacks. There's a lot that we're going to cover in this stream here, but I'm going to say hello to you, and then we're going to jump right into our guests. Sam Kemp, today's the perfect day, the perfect storm. Yes, absolutely. Get out there and vote, folks. Sam, thanks for being number one. Enoch, anticipation at its best. 0 days until some kind of confirmation. Well, this is going to be big. We're going to see how things go this evening. Get out the popcorn and get ready. I'm hoping that I'm going to watch a Rachel Maddow cry. That's kind of my goal for this evening. Hey, awesome job with the historical stream after the hearing. Yeah, Axis was, and Danny, the singer, obviously super helpful. I was blown away by that. It was amazing. Anders, howdy, moon travelers. Perfect. Let's go. Exciting times ahead. Finbeer's here. Thanks, man. Casey Hacks, good morning. Volt, when $1 hex, sir? Well, maybe we'll ask Axis when he thinks $1 hex. He's the guy that's probably more qualified to tell us. Is this true? That's what I want to know. Guys, did you see Axis was introduced in a New York event by one of the Milli Vanillis? Okay, we're going to have to get to the bottom of that one there. And we're going to put that on mute. Okay, that's going to be my number one question right there. A great day for America. What's up, Matt? Matt time. Drix, what's going on? This is going to be good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Folks, welcome to the Pulse. For the first time, I think, on stream is Danny Spencer. What's up, Danny?
Hey, how are you? And
I'm good. I'm good. Yes. Greetings.
Here's to Rachel Maddow's tears.
Yes, that's what those are right there. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This is Danny Spencer. You're the one that really is coordinated this amicus brief, right?
Well, yes, except I owe an incredible debt of gratitude to two guys, Kinetics and Crypto Coffee. Without them, not this much would have been done. First of all, they both contributed to the content, but and we all three contributed to the funding of this thing to get the attorney. But that being said, we had an opportunity to get reimbursed, and we didn't want to because we don't even want this much of this to be about financial gain. Yep. So this was for a principle. And we did get over 44,500 signatures, and every one of them, and I'll prove that to you in this stream. You can challenge me. Anyone wants to challenge me, go ahead. But they all did it on a principle.
Yeah,
and it wasn't
absolutely. And we'll get to that, Danny. I want to bring AxisALive, the man of the hour, as well. Axis, what's up, man? Good to see you.
God bless you guys. How's everyone doing?
Dude, I
Nice
love
to
your
see you,
voice.
Danny.
Hey, pleasure to meet you.
This is awesome to have you on, Axis. You were a big hit with that courtroom steps on both sides of before and after. It was by far the biggest stream I've ever done. There's clearly a lot of interest in this. You know, really post that. I'm really interested in your first take of any new insights or anything that's come, you know, really since you've been there in New York. There's a lot that people have talked about, a lot of commentary and all that, but how are you feeling kind of this far away from, you know, sitting in that courtroom?
Feeling just as good now as I did then. I was on the seminar the day after, right? And there was a panel with nuclear herbs.
Yep.
And I was able to ask the question around, this was like kind of something that I had mentioned, I think, after the hearing. And then again, I mentioned it in the seminar, and nuclear herbs was basically saying that this concept of them taking away our right to on the issue of fraud, right? Them taking away our right to transact and move money, and Richard's right to spend his money on what he wants, wouldn't have actually even be handled at this stage. That would actually be handled in the next stage if it were to go to trial.
Okay.
So that would be like one of the argumentations that the defense could put up, which was, you know, I thought maybe that you could just shut it down because you couldn't you couldn't take away people's right to transact here at this stage. So, you know, I walked away learning a little bit there too. So, but that just is another good defense that we have. Still feeling really confident in everything. You know, you guys heard firsthand, kind of right on the fly that day, and coming out of there just kind of electrically charged by watching these guys dominate the courtroom, so to speak. You know, he's got a great team. So yeah, it was exciting, and I was happy to be a part of it. And thanks everyone for your support that day.
Yeah, it was wonderful to have you there. I feel like you said it was kind of a moment that you experienced, not, you know, it seems like a moment for, I think, for broader crypto, but what did you mean by that when you said it was kind of, this was like, it felt like a moment?
Well, let's see. I think I said that in regards to how the case is basically setting up nicely for DeFi to have a path forward, you know, globally, but you know, that once this is all kind of behind us, then that sets precedence that you know, other teams and other blockchains can follow, right? So that there is a path to create blockchains without running into the same issues the second time. So you know, hopefully that brings a lot of the economic energy back, because I know a lot of crypto money has been leaving the U.S. and going elsewhere, and it'd be nice to see, you know, not such a drain, and maybe we could be like the pioneers of cryptocurrency here in the States. So
yeah,
that's what I meant when I said that you know, this is an important piece of history.
Yeah, it's very cool to be a part of that. And Danny, I wanted to shift to you because, you know, you point out some things that I don't think get pointed out a lot, and that is actually the historical nature of what the sacrifice was, what it really meant. And you spent a tremendous amount of time not only putting together the amicus brief with, you know, Kinetics and Crypto Coffee, but also I think you have some really unique observations that haven't really seen a lot of light. And I think it's important for folks to understand that. And you called me, and I was really intrigued by what you were pointing out. I want to give you an opportunity to share some of that right now.
Sure. Well, for me, it was almost unbelievable. I think that it sounds like Richard's team in general did a great job of defense. And I'm sure a lot of it was according, at least, and actually, I thank you for this, but it seemed like you were saying they kind of narrowly steered the conversation to see if they could get it dismissed. But I did notice that the question came up, and the question was, why in the hell would people throw money to this address? And I instantly knew why I did, and that's why I started the amicus brief. And hopefully they will answer that in the future, because part of their case notates the Pulse petition at pulsepetition.org, where we have more than 44,500 signatures. Not just signatures, but they all agreed to this. This is the front page. And if I may read it, the world may soon forget the specific overreaching allegations in the case of SEC versus Hart, but it can never forget the actions of the sacrificers. In standing up for the First Amendment, currently under attack, they have created a worldwide record of their actions which can never be censored or changed by any individual or government. More than 8,000 addresses. Those are archival nodes. And by the way, it actually is more than that because it's kind of doubled on the Pulse chain. All those records are also kept independently on the Pulse chain. But that's all around the globe, have recorded an everlasting record of the Pulse chain's 2 sacrifice events. And future generations may look back and appreciate this fight as a stepping stone in affirming the Supreme Court's prior rulings that money can be used as a form of free speech and is therefore protected. And we cite both of those Supreme Court cases. But key to this is this. Every single one of those signers had to dox themselves. It's not the kind of thing crypto bros like to do. They had to give their first name, their last name to a federal court, okay? They had to give their actual address. They had to give their phone number, and they had to give their email address. None of this was required from just sacrificing, and 44,500 people all stood up, agreed to that central point. So the SEC's position is Richard was doing a wink of a nod, and a nod, or tongue in cheek, whatever they said, and we all understood that. So Axie and Crypto Heartbeat, both of you guys understood this. Had nothing to do with principle. Okay. And that is not what happened. And if it was what happened, then those 44,500 and some odd people would never have signed this and doxed themselves for the federal court. So my point is there's more to this than meets the eye. Now, if you look at what happens when you did send money to the sacrifice address, you're going to see, hopefully this comes up. Yeah, this is from a wallet I have, and you can see I did 2 transfers. But the ones that I did to the sacrifice say Pulse chain sacrifice. A normal transfer says nothing. It gives you a wallet address. This verbiage, Pulse chain sacrifice, had to be approved by the people that run etherscan.io, the moderators. They had to vote on this and agree it was important enough to give it a place in history. This place in history will be forever recorded. Now, if this was just a normal internet event, you know what? Actually, stuff can disappear over time from the internet. It has happened. Unless you have something called the Wayback Machine, you can go back and see, but even that takes samples. It doesn't take everything. A blockchain like this can never, ever get torn down. Everybody's going to know that you sacrificed for the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. And when they asked okay, actually, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they said they had something like, I don't know, up to 10 people in the United States that claimed to be victims. Here's 44,500 plus claiming quite the opposite, and also claiming we knew damn well what we were doing. And the last argument I have, I'll ask both of you guys. I want you to answer truthfully. Imagine it was going to be the best investment of your life, but you had to agree that the proceeds would go to help kill slaves in China or North Korea. And that's definitely what it's going to be used for. Would either of you guys have sacrificed?
No, I would not have supported the killing of people.
Okay, so there you go. There has to be an underlying appreciation of what you're doing. And guess what? There's no heart-mind test. It doesn't exist. You can't say, well, you know what? In your case, Crypto Heartbeat, 10% of your heart was in it, but 90% was greedy, and you just were hoping that this thing would work. There is no such thing. It doesn't matter. If it's 1/16 of 1/2 of 1% heart, and all the rest, you hope that something will occur, you you definitely sacrificed for a principle. And I would put forth that those 44,500 people who doxed themselves that didn't need to do that actually probably care a lot more. Finally, there's one other point I'd like to make, and then I'll just sit back. This is it. Okay. Nobody's talking about this, and I suspect that it is top of mind of Richard's attorneys, as good as they are, and probably top of mind for the judge, and it would be insulting for them to have said it. But in the background of all this is a almost brand new, as it's called, the Chevron decision, reversing the ideology of the courts. Up until that point, since about 1984, I believe, or something, whenever the Chevron Valdez occurred, there was a ruling that said courts had to rely heavily on three-letter agencies' opinions of what was happening and give them more weight than they would anybody else. Now, the exact opposite. They've abused power. The Supreme Court has noted that, and they have said from this point forward, no interpretation. So let me ask you guys, is the SEC violating that when they go, well, there was a tongue-in-cheek understanding. It doesn't matter what Richard said. We know, because we're good at mind reading and all that, we interpret that as Richard's trying to just pull one fast one. I mean, no, they don't get to say that. And the judge reacted rather visually, or that's not even the right word, but she reacted to this whole thing about interpretation. And I think in the back of her mind is, hey, I don't want to get reversed on a decision. And I think it would have been insulting for Richard's attorneys to remind her of that. It's probably top of mind. And so that alone should throw out the SEC's case, because it's largely based on their interpretation of what's going on in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you say to that, Axis? You're on mute, buddy.
Yeah, that's super good points that you made there. And when it came to they are basically making some assumptions, and it's not a very good argumentative stance, really, especially coming from the SEC. You can imagine that when we send blockchain transactions for any cause, I mean, that's our freedom to do that. And this kind of also gets, I mean, I'm reaching here, but this kind of gets into some of the other concepts around, like, okay, if an American investor sends money from America for any cause anywhere else, well, you still can't take away their right to do that under any circumstance. And that's part of the freedom of assembly too, as well as the freedom of speech. And so the irony here is that even in the disclaimer and in the wording of, there is to be no expectation of profit from the work of others. You're giving your coins away. You're basically giving away your coins, and you're getting nothing in return. Those blanket statements were laid out there from the beginning, right? And I think that it's going missed by the SEC largely, and they keep coming up with circular argumentation and trying to assume what people were thinking. Now I'm going to play it from the other side. This is maybe interesting to you, Danny. I personally did not want to sacrifice money because there were no real guaranteed outcomes. So there was a whole cohort of people that did not sacrifice money, or did not sacrifice as much money, because there was no guarantees or protections in place of what you would get back. So that in and of itself kind of reinforces the fact that this really was a political initiative foundationally, and you really had to be kind of on board with the idea of sacrificing for these initiatives, and giving your money away with no expectations. Otherwise, you were just unwilling to. You were putting a lot of faith or trust or votes into somebody's mission, right? And so, for the judge to even say that, oh well, to take this SEC stance, for example, and say, okay, well, these people knew they were going to get back monetary value, would be a reach in my mind. There's so many more layers to that. What do you guys think?
Well, I would.
Go ahead. All right. No, I was going to change subject. Go ahead, Danny. You respond to that.
Well, I would say this, given the political nature of Richard and the things that he has talked about for hours and hours, starting his own island based on freedoms being taken away in the United States, I would make the argument that he was actually targeted for his political beliefs. There's a there's a statement by Richard which has somehow disappeared from the internet, and I don't know why exactly, but there's another one that came after he was charged. But before he was charged, there was a fairly famous rant he went on where he said, in typical Richard style, I did this and this and this, and SEC, what have you done? Oh, I see. You've taken people's money. You haven't rewarded anybody other than your own coffers. But by the way, I gave this much and did that and put this in charity, and I'm doing a lot more than you are, SEC. Okay. Then after he was charged, I sent a video. If you guys want to, I don't know, Matt can roll that if he wants, but this is, in my opinion, why he is being targeted. It takes a lot of balls to do this after a 3-letter government agency has hit you with a lawsuit, but he did it anyway. He came back and doubled down, and he said, basically, Gary Gensler may possibly end up with a lawsuit against him personally for violating his cloak of immunity. That takes.
I'm going to play that. I'm going to play that here. So let's actually listen to Richard, and hopefully I've captured the right one here. And this was actually the Merry Christmas stream. So let's take a look at that.
So, how many times recently has the SEC been declared arbitrary and capricious? Numerous times. Numerous. So, in the Ripple case, the judge basically said that the SEC lawyers were not performing with a faithful allegiance to the law and was changing their story based on, getting whatever they wanted. The SEC just recently, their lawyers were lying in a case, and the judge caught them in the lies and said, well, now that you've been caught in these lies, explain to me why I shouldn't sanction you and fine you directly. Fine the SEC lawyer that was lying to the court. And then you see all of his bosses at the SEC jump in there like, we're sorry, Your Honor. Please don't fine us, bro. Don't sanction us, bro. We're going to retrain everybody. So I will let you guys know where to find these specific documents. This is only a couple days old. The SEC. So then you see this guy's bosses at the SEC throwing him under the bus and throwing junior guys under the bus, if I remember correctly. And then talking about how they're going to retrain all their litigators and how they're getting rid of that guy and they're putting in new guys. And you're like, hey, you know what? You wouldn't have all these problems if you just didn't lie to the judge.
I'm not sure that was the exact one you were looking for, but
yeah, there is another one where he says he hopes that Gary cops a case, that they throw it at him because essentially what Gary does all the time when he's in front of the Senate and other times when he's talking publicly is he says, I can't comment on this, but I'll just tell you in general.
Yeah.
And that becomes him talking, not the SEC.
Yep.
And he could.
Yeah, there could be some liability there. Well,
yeah, he's a very wealthy guy, by the way. Gary he's got millions, this guy.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that. Well, let me shift gears on this. I just want to share a bit of a story and get your reaction to this. So my brother-in-law is an attorney and has been for the last 25 years. And we talk about these things on occasion. And I recall a moment I had an office in an office building. And one day the FBI and I'm not sure who it was, but 3-letter agency busted into the floor, went down the hall and arrested the guy at the end of the hall and took him out and took all of his stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, when the story kind of came out, he was fraudulently, basically, selling securities. He was doing things without a license. And basically they came in and raided his place. And I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law about this. And, when it comes to fraud cases, we have to realize, we're focused on this Richard Hart thing, right? And we're kind of splitting the hair on this. And one of the things that's very common with fraud cases is that there are a lot of victims typically, right? You look at Bernie Madoff, it's not a hard one to understand. So a lot of this stuff, and this is where I want some of your commentary, is that it's very rare that you're having to split a hair to figure out if something is fraud or not. We make this case that there were 10 people maybe in the United States, and we know that folks like who is it? Eric Wall, says he's sending a nuclear bomb to the SEC, and these references to, people kind of telling on Richard. But then you got 44,000 plus signatures saying, hey, no, we understood what this was. It's not very common that in fraud cases that it's hard to understand what the fraud is and where the fraud has been perpetuated. Do you feel like, all of that kind of precedent and experience with other fraud cases kind of plays into this one, going, hey, a lot of times when things get in front of a judge, there's some very basic, it's got to be clear, almost like in the NFL when they're like, all right, we made a ruling on the field, it's inconclusive, so that stands. Axis, what are your thoughts about that, and in this idea that, hey, we're really having to dig, we're mind reading, we're doing all this, the fraud is not obvious here, we're having to kind of make up or split the hair on this. Is that how does that resonate with you?
I don't know how there can be a fraud case when the money that was sent sent with no expectations, right? And there was no, you weren't, at best you were getting points of some that had no value. And in the case of in defense of the SEC, that's at their best. And then at worst, in the case of the SEC, he launched a blockchain on his own dime and dropped you coins that had no value to start. And in both cases, I don't see where the fraud is.
Well, what's interesting is, when we launched the Texan token, what the inspiration for us was the donation to the Sens Foundation. And what was interesting when we talked to our attorneys about it, they said, well, there's a very well-worn path when it comes to what a donation is, right? When you say I'm donating to an organization, it's very clear that that organization has the right to do whatever they choose to do unless it's a designated fund. And what I think is interesting that Johnny Chaos is pointing out, and shout out to Johnny Chaos for being here, it was a donation for political representation of the space. I think that the terminology, if he said you're going to make a donation to this sacrifice wallet, that donation is for free speech and those type of things. I think that this term sacrifice is a challenge because it's not commonly used, right? We don't like, oh yeah, I did a sacrifice the other day. No, but you did probably make a donation over the years to many different things. And that's a very understood, clear thing. And I think Johnny's pointing out a really good point that I think if the term donation was used, it would have been a lot more clear. Whereas this kind of arbitrary term, which I think what they're saying is you were just trying to do an ICO without having to register. And of course, that's the argument. And, the expectation thing, the fact of the matter is, I think it falls apart because there's no investment contract. And you made the really good point early, Axis, that there was, you wouldn't have put, there was no guarantees of outcome. There were no claims to say, hey, we're going to do this and build this thing. You were just basically going, I don't know, I like this guy and I'm going to sacrifice this money for this political purpose. It's interesting. And I think that language potentially could be a bit of a stumbling block for some because it's not, super clear what a sacrifice is.
Well, let me say this. A sacrifice to me, it's a normal word. I've sacrificed, look, I'm 62 years old. I've sacrificed all my life to be able to have a good life for my kids or my mother, my sister, all these things. It's all sacrifice. So I think people inherently know what that word means. And it also means you ain't getting your money back. And by the way, if the SEC was only this much right, they would be able to say, look, this pulse chain business hasn't worked out all that well. And so I'm sure the people that put their money in will line up with us as victims and they'll hope that we can get them some money back. But nobody has really. Maybe there are 10 people that are little crybabies. But when 44,500 plus people sign a document after things perhaps not turning out all that well financially, and they still stand on principle and they still dox all their information, well, that tells you something. This really was a sacrifice in the truest sense of the word. A donation is something, oh yeah, I donated to this. And by the way, that's another thing that's being ignored. I think Axie brought that up, is that $27 million was raised for the Sens Foundation. And by the way, every one of the people that did that actually took a bit of a financial loss. Let me tell you why. They got, 25% less crypto if the thing worked out, which it did, than the guys that didn't do that. So they had an extra special layer of concern for raising money for longevity so that people could live a healthier life. And those are all things that Richard kind of embodies in his books that he's written, his rants that he's been on. And two things can literally be true at the same time. I think that's another very important thing, right? It's possible for me to hope that things will work out, but as Richard used to say, software's hard, it might not. And at the same time, I want my name forever on that digital Mount Rushmore of the blockchain, carved into those archival nodes in support for the First Amendment. There's a reason it's the very First Amendment. It's very important. Freedom of speech and freedom of assembly is, without that, we really have nothing. We might as well live in China.
Yeah. Well, it would be really, I think it would be an incredible coup. And I think this is where Richard could actually get the glory, is if there is some sort of precedent set. You know, we've got the other cases and that are precedent for your money being a form of speech, but to have that actually spoken specifically as it relates to crypto and writing to the blockchain, I think would be an absolute, that would be the greatest outcome in my opinion. But I'm going to shift gears and ask you, Axis, you were there in the courtroom, and there's some people that are in the chat that are like, they haven't heard like what happened there. Do you mind going back? And you shared 4 big points, and you may have some other thoughts, you know, since that time. Can you give people a kind of a recap of what your sense was in the courtroom? Because that's something no one else has had an experience outside of the 80 people that you were with, and what that was like. If you can kind of characterize that as best you can, I think that's a real service to people.
Yeah, sure. So it started off on this issue of jurisdiction. And there's a big debate on, like, does the SEC have jurisdiction over this case? And the defense made some pretty good points. And one of the questions the judge asked the SEC was, well, where is the blockchain? And that kind of made everyone chuckle a little bit, because, you know, there's no real clear answer. And then the other piece of the jurisdiction was, when Richard gets on a YouTube live stream and broadcasts globally, is that it's not like he's targeting the US. Like, he's not looking down a funnel and targeting, he's not sending his message out just to you at the US, you know, investor base. And even if no matter how you spin that message, he can't, like, not broadcast to the US, because it's US citizens' right to be able to look on the web freely and find YouTube broadcasts anyway. So, you know, this guy's broadcasting this message globally. And that was another funny point, is when she stepped in and said something along the lines of, you know, like, well, you know, how does basically implying that, like, the SEC can't basically control how other countries transact, and then the origination of the transactions from the US, even in that case, like, you know, it's very much changing the syntax of how the legal framework has to adjust to the technology. And I brought up this idea of the syntax of the legalities of what this technology unlocks societally, and how that there's going to have to be a new language that's created, or a new regulatory body, or some sort of new system in place to regulate this new system, you know, and honor the jurisdictional element, right? So, because you're talking about a global technology and a global phenomenon with global markets, and then, but at the same time, you're having this one regulatory body trying to, like, chop off the US, which is totally counterintuitive, because that's not very pro US economy if you do that. So it really begs the question of, like, what is the SEC really doing here? And it made their case seem petty on the basis of jurisdiction. So there was people in the room from over 10 different countries there that flew in here to the States to support, you know, their position on the case. And so they're in and of itself, you get, this is a global matter, not a US based matter. And no matter if you're talking about where Richard's located, where the blockchain's located, where the investors are located, it's global. It's a global phenomenon. So like I think that their strongest defense is on the basis of jurisdiction. So that was like the first major point. And then the second major point was on the basis of, well, another major point. I won't say second because I'm not trying to order these in terms of importance from here on out. But this idea of the chronology of the argumentation inside the written documentation from the SEC, there was this the timelines didn't line up, and so basically Richard's lawyers, all they had to do was speak to the complaint, and they beat the shit out of the complaint in terms of like the timeline was all messed up, and the judge had to kind of come to terms with this new concept of how the sacrifice wallets can receive funds indefinitely, because that's how the technology works. Like you can, if a wallet exists out on the web, people can send money to that wallet forever, and you can't like really shut that ability off. And so that had to become a consideration. And but even though that is the reality, Richard did come on public streams. I think it was during the Hex conference. Don't quote me on that. And said, stop sending money to the sacrifice address. Stop sending money to it. So he even tried to cover his bases that way too. Knowing that those people wouldn't be getting credited with points. Let's see what else. The general feeling of being in there was very much like every time the SEC would respond, it would seem very circular and diluted, and they really couldn't argue in any sort of powerful way because they were standing on a shaky foundation. I kept saying, because the way that their suit or their complaint was filed was like everything's out of order. They're conflating things. They're talking about an alter ego, which they dropped in the beginning. Like they're like, okay, this whole these blockchains as alter egos of Richard, they dropped that immediately, which I felt like was maybe a mistake, because it really set them off on the wrong foot. And let's see what else. Those were the major pieces, I think, that are worth it. Just every time that Richard's lawyers would take a small win, you'd hear giggling, or like you'd look over and they'd be like, oh, got him again. And the only piece that I think I got challenged on from my friend that was sitting next to me, who was trying to come at it from a non-biased view, was this idea of the judge really has to come to terms with that this was a people giving away their money with no expectations, and that there wasn't some tongue-in-cheek backdoor deal going on where these guys knew they were going to get something of tremendous value. That's something that remains to be seen, how she's going to rule on that, or if it's going to go to the next stage. So
I'll say this: if it does go to the next stage, Axie, then they got to deal with a 44,509 people that dox themselves after the fact. Why would they do that if there wasn't a principal involved? And so to me, that's clear as a bell. The other thing about these 44,500 people, none of us, me included, and not Crypto Coffee and not Kinetics, nobody spoke to Richard about this. Nobody. Richard has been completely unavailable. Richard never talked about the concept that two things could be true at the same time. That's not in his previous language. Richard never talked about he hinted at, but it wasn't some sort of mind control thing where Richard gave us mindless robots what to say. And he never talked about the significance of a digital Mount Rushmore pushed across 8,000 plus different nodes all over the world that can never be shut down by any particular government. And yeah, that's kind of worth it, because imagine, and I think some people have speculated that he was shooting for a court case. I don't see that as a possibility, because who would want that? But he wasn't afraid of it either. And once it came his way, he fired them both barrels right at the SEC, which, that's far from being conciliatory and trying to work out a deal. So there's a lot of principle behind this. Mm-hmm. And that principle is so strong about the sacrifice. I mean, both of you guys have confirmed that if this sacrifice was for a different cause, you wouldn't have sacrificed. And I think all 44,500 plus people that dox themselves would agree with that. So
Yeah.
I think they've got the weakest case on a wink and a nod. Although I will say that the unincorporated alter egos, I'm glad that's gone. And I'll tell you why I'm glad. We went into that in great length in the Pulse petition, because it turns out securities law, at least from what I can understand, I'm not a lawyer, that if you have an unincorporated alter ego of Richard, that means that that money really kind of belongs to Richard. And in an extreme case, they could go into the wallets of Crypto Heartbeat and AxisALive and say, you know what? Those hex things in there, yeah, you need to turn those over to us because we have a judgment against Richard, and those unincorporated alter egos really belong to Richard. And so we're going to protect you by taking all your money. Now, do I think that was a case that could have ever succeeded? Not in my wildest dreams, but hey, you could have a far left judge from from Elizabeth Warren's camp. It's
Yeah.
possible. This is New York, you know?
Yep.
And so you kind of
That
roll
actually
your
kind
dice.
of makes it more clear why they dropped it, because you can't, because that would be so impossible. It'd be such an uphill battle to say that, you know, the assets that you two guys hold are Richard's assets. Okay. That doesn't even make sense. So yeah,
Yeah.
good on.
Well-
I guess maybe they were backed into a corner with that one a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think is it's helpful to back out from this too is, you know, we see all kinds of projects on the Pulse chain. We know of all kinds of projects from meme coins to everything else. And we see different founders and different people that are, you know, presenting themselves. I think that we have to, you know, what I think about often is, you know, Richard obviously is smart. We've identified that, you know, many have, you know, noticed that long ago. But, you know, if you think about the wherewithal to advocate like this, and I this is the point I like to make a lot of times is it's very rare that you run into people that aren't just selfishly motivated. And I think that there's this kind of duality, right? We see the twerking Richard and the, you know, abrasive Richard, but then we see the actions. And it feels a lot like kind of a Trump character in some respects. But what's fascinating to me is that, you know, Richard saw ahead of time before, you know, free speech wasn't as under attack when we were sacrificing for the Pulse chain. It was not front and center. It wasn't the number one topic for the election. This was prior to the you know, the people that were buying sandwiches for the Canadian truckers before they got their accounts frozen. This is before we had the Twitter files. There was a lot of things that happened. And I think what's amazing to me is, you know, any other founder out there that didn't have the resources of Richard, you know, probably couldn't have mounted this kind of, you know, this kind of case with these lawyers, couldn't have hired them, and could have potentially easily been bullied by the SEC. And to see this kind of thing, it really points out, Axis, what you said, I think, first thing. And that is the lawyers were disciplined to go after the actual complaint. I think in streams like this, we go all over the map. We're like, oh, look at this and look at this and look at this. But the complaint, all you can respond to is ultimately what the SEC's case against you is. And the discipline that they had to basically pick that apart and to show how kind of thrown together it was. And I think you referred to them as the B team. And I think that's what's so interesting about this case is that it's like Richard knew these things ahead of time. And whether he, you know, planned to have a, you know, a case, well, he talked about the glory so many times, right? And it's like, well, it's hard to define. What is the glory for Richard Hart? But I want to remind everyone, you know, when you do this type of work that he's doing, you invest this kind of money, and then you have the influence to be able to encourage people to literally throw their money into a hole. Whatever that, you know, to actually sacrifice it like we're saying that people did. Is pretty much a miracle, but it's also it illustrates the amazing nature and structure of the blockchain itself, the true tenets of why Bitcoin was created and what this can do for societies and people to literally remove counterparties. And these counterparties might be central banks, they might be the Federal Reserve. And to me, when Richard is doing this type of work, I imagine somebody that's really wealthy who's looking to retire, or somebody that just wants to sit back on a beach, he's going to a tremendous amount of effort and dealing with, I think, a lot of ignorant people, but also very, very difficult people, and actually is advocating for them because this is meaningful. And so I don't want to miss those points and really point out the fact that, you actually have to care about people to advocate for them in this way, to put real money on the table and to really go after these things because, um, he probably could have figured out a way to settle this thing, and he was not interested in that. And so I just want to make those points. But will you speak to this kind of A team, B team thing, Axis, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Yeah, it is clear that the SEC didn't. Yeah, I don't know if these are their best guys in class or what, but it sure didn't seem like that to me. And but again, like they didn't really have a lot to work with. I think that complaint was pretty quickly thrown together and then just kind of slapped down. And they expected, Richard to just roll over and try to settle,
Yeah.
just like any other project. Like this was just like any other project, which clearly we all know it's not, because Richard's not just any other guy in cryptocurrency. So I think
Now, do
that
you think he?
they
go
were
ahead.
just they met their match, I guess, here, and he had all the bases covered ahead of time.
Yeah. So what's your guess? If you had to guess what happens next, Axis, what do you think? What happens next?
So this is interesting. So I think there's one of two outcomes. Either, of course, this leads to a dismissal, or more likely, actually, I think that they're going to have to withdraw. The SEC is going to have to
Yeah.
withdraw because they don't have a good case. Now, does that mean that they withdraw and then try again with a new document, maybe with new complaints and better lined up? Maybe, but that's still going to be an uphill battle. And I guess Nuclear Herbs would be the guy to tell you more, but I guess that's unlikely that they would withdraw from this one and then come back again, because it just doesn't look good and it sets a tough precedent for
Well,
that.
and this election seems pretty pivotal in that as well. I mean, Richard's come out very clearly for Donald Trump. He's obviously encouraging people to vote for Donald Trump. Do you think, or Danny, do you think that this is consequential here with a potential regime change in Washington? And with someone like Trump winning and saying he's going to fire Gary Gensler on day one, how important is this kind of moment and the timing of all this?
Beyond consequential. I believe that even if he isn't technologically savvy with crypto, Trump now realizes the power of crypto, and the fact that he intimated that he would actually back our Federal Reserve with Bitcoin is mind blowing. If 5% of that comes to pass, it's going to be mind blowing. And there's one other thing. I'm going to make this anecdotal because I can't give my source, unfortunately, and I don't even know exactly which political action committee is being referenced. But I have somebody very reliable that knows a rather large crypto political action committee. And like most special interests, they tried to meet with Camilla's team. And they asked Kamala to show up, and she would not. The team did, and they met with them. And they were told that they couldn't really say much about crypto because Elizabeth Warren does not want them to. And she is responsible for gigantic amounts of money coming into the Democratic coffers. Now, interestingly enough, John Deaton, who helped me originally a little bit with a 1 hour off the record discussion when I was putting this together. John Deaton, for those that don't know, is the attorney that did the amicus brief in the Ripple case and very successfully helped Ripple win. In fact, the judge noted a lot of what he had to say in the amicus brief in her decision. But be that as it may, he somehow got the Republican nomination to run against Elizabeth Warren. If you go to YouTube and you look at the second debate, he destroyed her. Okay. Apparently, she's on the Senate Banking Committee. And at the time, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan was testifying before her very, very shortly after he agreed to a $290 million settlement for helping Jeffrey Epstein do human trafficking on minors. And she chose to ignore all that and not ask any questions. Why, you might ask? Well, her campaign finance manager, even in this race against John Deaton, is a gentleman that is known as the personal PAC man. And he was given that name from the Boston Globe. And he has raised millions and millions and millions of dollars in dark money PAC contributions. So Elizabeth, her favorite thing to do is go around and say, I don't take more than $200 from anybody. And while that's true, she gets millions of dollars funneled towards her campaign. And what all the PAC has to do is not mention her, but talk about the opposition in the worst possible way. And she gets millions and millions and millions. And actually, the whole thing came up in the last presidential race when she was running. Pete Buttigieg, I believe, was running, and she accused him of being a rich guy getting money in wine caves. And the truth came out. She was taking $4,500 pictures per couple at her wine event. Okay. So this was all arranged by the personal PAC man who actually made his money in the pharmaceutical business. So he sold a prescription drug company for $400+ million. And he makes sure that she has lots of money. So if you look at her coffers during this race, she has 8 million. Mr. Deaton has, I think, 2 million, 1 million of which he put up himself. So he probably won't win because I don't think he was prepared to actually get the nomination. I pray to God I'm wrong. I pray to God he wins, but it's Massachusetts, and basically he has gotten all of crypto on his side, but that's not going to win Massachusetts, I don't think. Again, I pray I'm wrong.
Yeah, you never know. Tonight's going to be an exciting night to watch the returns in the election. Yeah. We're coming up here on the hour, and I wanted to transition. Axis, you've had some really interesting thoughts. You've kind of I think shared some things over the last couple of days, and have some pretty cool analysis of kind of the future, right? So I want to kind of put on hold the SEC case for a minute and really turn things over to you to really talk about your vision and thoughts for Hex specifically, but also this ecosystem and where things are headed in the future. A lot of people are very interested in your commentary and thoughts.
Well, we're on a copy of Ethereum, and I believe, I don't know how you couldn't believe this, but I believe that Ethereum is the backbone of sound money on the blockchain. I don't know how you could look at Bitcoin with a 10-minute block time and think that that's going to be suitable to service global transactions. So, but Ethereum with 13-second block times, at least it's a little bit closer to home on something that's fast enough and useful enough. You can build on top of it, and has all these layer 2s now components, and privacy's coming. And this is important for us on Pulse Chain because we get all of the upgrades downstream of Ethereum. So we get all of the brain trust of Ethereum, funnel it down a pipeline into something that's a little bit smaller with much more upside potential. So this chain enriches people more, but comes with all of the technical capabilities. And so, like, when people say, well, where's the value, or why hasn't it performed in price? Well, they're missing the game. The game is a game of units, and I've been trying to preach that for a long time. So, I think people need to appreciate what they have more now, which is the ability to capture more units of the system by staking Hex or using LP farms and actually learning the tools and using them and applying them in creative ways. Because by doing so, you're actually winning, not through price appreciation, but through obtaining more units of the real estate on the Pulse Chain blockchain. And in this discovery process of the first year of Pulse Chain, we've seen new sub communities pop up seemingly out of nowhere. Whereas we thought, coming into this, I'm not going to say that personally I thought that the world's largest airdrop would be successful on the basis that you're copying everything and that it should have some amount of value, even though that did become true for things like the forked copy of Wrap BTC. Why this chain is challenging the notion of what is value. How can this fake copied wrapped BTC that's not even backed with collateral be transferable for any amount of real Bitcoin? Like, that doesn't So Pulse Chain is really making people think about, well, what is value, and how is value created on the chain? And my thoughts are, like, look, guys, like, you'll be able to capture units of a brand new blockchain that's technically sound, faster, cheaper, which allows for a completely different meta game, which means that there's more opportunity here, more upside, smaller market caps. It's really an amazing thing where, you know, man, if people could just see the potential, you know, those guys, I guess I shouldn't say if people could, because there's a lot of us that do see the potential and we're capitalizing on it every day. And you know, we're staking our claim now so that when the world figures it out, you know, you're already in position. I look to some of these sub communities and projects that are building out now, and they're building these huge liquidity webs. And that's going to be the foundation of the coins that people that are coming to Pulse Chain a year from now to participate are going to have to look around. They're going to be like, okay, what am I going to take a stake in? And this is going to be at 10x, 20x, 30x valuations, where these liquidity pools balloon in size. And it's all because of Hart's law, right? In the AMM. You know?
So let me ask you about that, because I'm going to try to get you to throw us a bone here. You know, we talk about liquidity webs and all of this, and Hart's law, obviously bonded liquidity, things move up together that are bonded together. Totally get that. You know, this potential upside because of, you know, Pulse itself having this utility on the Pulse chain, just like ETH does on Ethereum. You know, this assumption that these things are going to move, and they're going to move, you know, to the upside. There's more to that story of the kind of webs of liquidity and the value there. You kind of hint at these things related to wrap BTC and this value of something that it shouldn't have any value, but we copied it and we agree that it does have some value. Can you go a little bit more detail to help the kind of the neophyte in this world understand really what you're talking about and what that really means in kind of practical terms? Like, you know, we're seeing a lot of this happening right now, and it's preparing for something in the future. How does the regular guy benefit from this type of thing?
Well, how would they? So the regular guy that's in crypto or not in crypto? Let's really.
No, somebody that's in crypto. I think there's, you know, I see there's a lot of projects that are doing a lot of really interesting things with liquidity, right? And the numbers look really big, but it's, you know, it's kind of it's abstracted from the real value, because ultimately the Pulse chain's copies, right? We have the real value that's been bridged over, but there's this other value there, right? There's this other value that is really, I think, the brilliance of copying over the system state. But creating these webs is the only benefit that, hey, I hope this moves up and we're all bonded together, or is there a different play here? And you know, maybe there's not, but I'm just curious about how.
Well, there is. I don't think this is for the regular guy, but this is for like the builder class of people on Pulse Chain, is to be able to create value and not rely on the copied, you know, tokens, because those copied tokens, they're broken. Like a lot of them don't work. And so then there's a whole other class of people, builders, that are trying new things that you couldn't do on Ethereum. For example, the one that keeps coming in my mind is like the PTGC and UFO guys. Yeah. They were able to take the fee-based token model and make it work on Pulse Chain, whereas on Ethereum it didn't work. So many copies, so many attempts at that failed. And now they have this like $7 or $8 million liquidity web that's there at the foundation, at the bedrock of Pulse Chain, so that as the prices of the core RH assets increase, they're gonna directly benefit. But then there's other of us that are taking a completely different approach, that are trying to bring value back to Hex through something like an instant rebate, through a coupon rate, where you can, you know, incentivize long-term committing to the system and getting paid to do it, to try to solve the demand side of the problem with something like COM. You got all these different people building on this chain, trying different approaches. And so then what that does is it gives the regular guy something to invest in that's not been done on Ethereum before.
Okay.
You know, I always kind of, you know, dial it back though, when I say, like, if you're just getting into to cryptocurrency, it's a leap to get into Pulse Chain. Like, you have to know a lot. So not that it's ironic, because the trading on Pulse Chain and the market movements are pretty easy. Like, that's like easy mode, but getting into Pulse Chain is complex. Like, being able to go from Coinbase to get into Pulse Chain is many steps. So there's people that need to come up and solve the onboarding issue, because it's gotten more complex, but I think it can go back the other way too. That was one of the benefits that Hex had was, you really just had to learn how to use MetaMask and then you were good.
Yeah.
But now you got to learn how to use a bridge, and you got to not get hacked in the process. Not to flood it, but it is challenging for some people clicking on spam links and stuff. So there's layers and depth to it. But if you can get through that and get in here at the ground floor, it sets up nicely for a big upside for, just for like a small bag, $1,000, $10,000, like those things, you can get huge multiples over here. So,
well, we got 283 people on 3 platforms here, so this is definitely a topic people are interested in. You hinted when you were at the steps of the SEC that there were some things that you were going to announce and you were going to be sharing about as it related to Hex specifically. Is that something you can do here, or you can share a little bit more about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, this idea, I kind of mentioned it already, but this idea of being able to pay people to stake Hex for the long term, it does 2 things. It locks up more Hex, which creates more stickiness, makes the whole system more valuable, because Hex is such a important component of Pulse Chain. That's where a lot of the value is going to get stored over the long term. So we're just trying to make a system that we're leveraging, like something like Communis, which is like the tokenized T-share, to pay people to stake long, and because it's already such a good thing on its own. But now if you can give people a secondary reason where you can scratch that itch of both instant gratification with delayed gratification, I think it's like it could end up being the holy grail of getting the most adoption possible. So like we're trying to solve these economic problems of solving for demand, and one way we think we can do it is by paying people to onboard. And when I say we, I'm not talking about a whale or a pod of whales doing it on their own necessarily, or like the staker class doing it on their own necessarily, paying people to onboard into Hex, but where the free market as a whole can find the right price for COM that makes sense to get the maximum amount of adoption into Hex, where you're hitting the maximum market efficiency with the least amount of liabilities, so that there's the least amount of negative externalities on the Hex and COM price, and you get like a steady incline of adoption over time, kind of like we saw last cycle when people really believed in the staking narrative, and you just kept seeing more and more Hex being staked for the long haul. And so we're taking this one step further with the AxisALive fusion, which is something that I have announced a little bit here and there through articles, or like talking briefly on streams. And it's a proof of concept for the HexCom fusion, because mechanically it's the same system. These ideas of these 2 token systems, like a fusion, I think that's something that people don't understand yet, is like Hex on its own it doesn't have a pair with something, and in the past we were pairing it with Ethereum, but that was a native layer 1, so it was always in competition with each other, whereas like Hex and COM are both deriving and interacting with the T-share component, so they're the same system, like a combined market cap. And so then there can be like a synergy between the 2 tokens, so that when you're buying the COM token up, you're buying tokenized T-shares and future minted inflation. And it's so backloaded on the back end that what you're doing is you're basically saying that, okay, I'm willing to put my dollars towards marketing the future staking of Hex. And so this AxisALive fusion that is launching this month, it's going to be a proof of concept so that you can accelerate the pace of what would be done on the HexCom on its own in like a fraction of the time, because Hex is such a massive liquidity pool. It's got like a $30 million liquidity pool today. You pick out any sub ecosystem, none of those ecosystems on their own can move Hex around. Hex is big, heavy, does millions of dollars of volume per day, but Axis can affect the COM price, because COM's only a $200,000 asset in terms of liquidity, and Axis is like a $1 million asset. So in terms of liquidity, so we outweigh COM, and when I say we, the AxisALive fusion will outweigh COM 5-1. So if they're bonded in the right way, and AxisALive is both a proof of concept mechanically, because they have similar mechanics as Hex and COM, if we can prove it mechanically and bond it so that if that proves itself, it's also pulling up the COM price with it, then that means that people that go ahead and buy Hex and stake it for the long term are getting more money back today. So this is the concept of the instant rebate, and we think we're just going to accelerate and prove it through the Hex AxisALive, and it's all coming back to Hex.
Wow. Well, that's perfect timing. Perfect timing. Well, this has been fantastic. My last question is really around this PDI narrative. You and I talked about this, Axis, in a number of ways. We haven't talked in a while, and I wanted to get your latest kind of commentary. I'm seeing a lot out there in general about the case being made for PDI being intentionally going to be this stable coin of the Pulse chain. What are your current thoughts on the state of PDI and in light of kind of what's happened over the last couple of days?
Yeah, so some interesting stuff has been happening on PDI. So let me go back to September 4th. There was a massive spike on it. Let's see, I'm going to measure it from the breakup. It went and did 140% against Pulse, and then it retraced the move. And during that retracement period, something interesting happened where the maker vaults were turned on, and let's see, USD, I think PDI was minted to bring to be sold for the PUSDC to bring the prices up to parity, so that PUSDC and PDI now track and they're at the same price. And that just proved that the maker contract that was been forked over is now working. And that's important because there's a whole narrative behind this idea that the copied DAI could actually go to $1 and peg, and the community is now actively trying to do it by pushing through proposals through a new maker front end on the Pulse chain. And so like the community's taking it into their own hands to make this a reality, and you're seeing a price response to that activity. Just in the last couple of days, price of PDI is up 51%. And I think the way that I want to talk about PDI is from the idea that, look, this coin has great narrative. It's got a ton of volume. For example, today it's done $879,000 of volume. It's got like a $30 million liquidity web, but the majority of that's like a couple million. It's like, I think $3 to $4 million. Could be a little more. I'd have to double check. But so it's got volume. It's got volatility. Tons of things on chain, and you'll see that reflected in when PDI makes huge price moves. The gas fees on Pulse chain go up because it's got so many connected pairs. So it's so deeply rooted into the web of all of these connected coins. It's kind of at the heart of what Pulse chain's about right now. And so there's a whole bunch of really smart OGs that think that this is bollocks and it's not going to happen. And in my mind, it doesn't need to peg the traditional way through the maker contract for it to have been a successful narrative where it did some crazy, amazing things, as it already has done. It's one of the best performers on the chain. It's like very widely distributed because its distribution occurred pre-fork. It's got, again, all the major qualities of an asset that you'd want to participate in. There's tons of opportunity in it on the basis of volatility, volume, narrative, TVL. Like it's got all that going for it on its own without pegging. So it's an important, it should be a part of different people's webs. Look, if you look at our tokens in the solid index, like SolidX and Axis, we're bonded to it because it gives us free volume, because these art bots are always rotating money through this token. And so look right now, if you look at those two charts, we're getting pulled up because PDI is going up. So it's positively impacting the things around it.
Gotcha. Okay.
There's one point to all that, which I think is worth acknowledging. This is one hell of a solid community. And I guess, as Sami often says, we're some sort of cult, which is great in crypto. And I think if you take, for example, Axie's thing that he's working on, that is a leverage play on COM, which is a leverage play on the core coins. And the core coins are not going to go anywhere. And the reason we know they're not going to go anywhere is through the worst possible price performance over the last year or so. I think we were behind everything, like really rotten. And yet we still have you, Crypto Heart, we have coffee, we have so many influencers, right? And they're solid, they're right there. But what else is right there? The very thing we started talking about at the beginning of this show, the frickin' court case. 44,500 people without financial incentive actually dox themselves. They're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Doesn't even matter if Richard streams or doesn't stream or whatever. His thought process has influenced his community so much that we're very strong. We typically don't day trade. We're not trying to score a quick profit. We're there. We're solid. We are going to be what people eventually turn to. It's going to happen.
I wanted to say that earlier too, about when I was talking about for the regular guy, what's over here, it is community. And how could I forget, right? I go to these events all the time, and it's real. There's a lot of people that really believe in what we're doing here, and people are making money doing it. I know there's the complainers and stuff, but no, the people are making a lot of money, and there's a lot of opportunity on this chain because the chain works and it's got the right tools. Like my dev loves Pulse Chain because you can make as many RPC requests for free. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Richard, for doing that for us. We really appreciate that, because now we can build cool shit on your chain.
Yeah.
It's and that's just the tip of the spear on what, the cool little things that's happening over here that we're afforded because we're backed by billionaires, man. Like the guy cares. He wants us to be successful.
Yep.
And just the everyday guy that isn't tech savvy, okay? Somebody that doesn't even know what the hell an RPC is, but he sacrificed, that guy is going to see a payday. He has suffered, or she, for years now, but they've kept up with his community, and they're going to be handsomely rewarded.
Yeah. Well, you make a really good point. There's amazing, I just think about kids in, elementary school picking teams, belonging, fitting in, and having purpose. People don't normally assign value to that. It's a tremendous value because there's a lot of people, especially in this kind of decentralized world where, connection is difficult for a lot of people to make. What I've noticed in this community is that the value goes way beyond just, hey, I made a buck here or there. There's some really lifetime relationships being built, and it's just not it's not missed on me in the sense that care and concern for people is hard to find. Genuine people who are actually thoughtful and like, yeah, I actually am concerned about who you are and value you as a person. And I don't want to ever lose that, because those events I think are a tremendous example of that. Is like, what makes Axis, what made you go to New York? What do these people do this for? I have a feeling they're going to meet up with friends as well, right? There's a connective tissue that's beyond just, hey, we might make some money in this thing. And I think that's the kind of the beauty of this thing being, fighting for free speech or advocating for freedom of movement or the ability to transact, is that actually it's because it makes, life better, because money's just a tool, and what you do with that is going to have a certain impact, but generally it's for quality of life. And that's generally around relationships. So guys, I really appreciate you being here. Danny, of course, the one who has spearheaded the amicus brief, this 44,000 plus people. I appreciate all that you've done. How do people find you if you want to be found on Twitter and other places like that?
Well,
how do people follow you, Danny?
I'm a reluctant participant in this because I even though I did what I did, I didn't want to go public. But when I heard that they didn't understand why anybody would give money, so I guess you can't be half pregnant. So it's Danny Spencer on Twitter or X now. So
awesome, fantastic.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate you.
Pleasure, and thank you, sir, for everything you've done. And
yeah,
Crypto Heartbeat.
I know I can be a bit wordy sometimes, so
no. I appreciate it all. I appreciate it all. Believe me. And,
no, that's fantastic.
and shout out to Kinetics and Crypto Coffee. None of this would be possible without them.
Well, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining, Danny, and I'll catch you next time. I appreciate you so much.
Thanks.
See you, man. Well, Axis, I'll finish up with you, man. You've got a lot going, and I just appreciate the fact that, there's guys way smarter than me that are out there building and doing stuff. You're kind of wired into that community, and you're seeing, I think, complexity beyond complexity, but you see opportunity there. I think that's an indicator of really good things. The one thing we haven't talked about is this money that's sitting out there, right? All the ETH and all the stuff that's in the sacrifice wallet. if you had to kind of read the tea leaves about this future, a lot of people are anticipating that Richard's going to, come in and pump the market. It seems like to me that it's got to go somewhere. Is that on your radar at all? Is that still a narrative, if you will?
Is what a narrative? Is what a
Well,
narrative?
I mean, this anticipation. I mean, I'm looking at this and saying, Richard's waiting for the right time. And I feel
Timing.
like, Richard, it's not just Richard, right? A lot of people that have significant resources. I know people, and we're just two guys, right? There's a lot of people that are kind of anticipating kind of go time. We've obviously got the election this evening. There are things people are waiting for. I can read the cycles. I can see where things are. This is going to, you don't want to throw money into a down market and into a hole. But when it's kind of go time, I assume that those dollars are going to be deployed, but it's also going to be followed by a lot of other resources. And it's kind of almost like the Braveheart hold thing. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, the timing couldn't be better to get in. I feel like in all the time we've been in this kind of pre and post pulse chain era, there's never been a better time to take a position than there is now. Prices are affordable. You can capture the blockchain at the lows practically here, no matter which of the core four you're digging into. And it's all before Ethereum really kind of starts to flip the other way. I would tell you guys to go and watch Ben Cohen's analysis because he's been right for so long on ETH BTC, the ratio. BTC has been overperforming and ETH is now contrarian. And that's important because ETH is down, Pulse Chain is down. They're kind of leveraged versions of each other. And so when ETH finally does, by the way, this is totally normal. It's happened the last 3 cycles where ETH just goes and gets smoked for quite a while. And then eventually that reverses in a big way and really fast and violently, because eventually the gains in Bitcoin just slows down. And, and so then people look for alternative plays, and ETH is the number one in terms of TVL. It's got the ETF, and so we were, and on that note, Crispy and I were looking into the data last night on my private session around Ether's correlation to Pulse Chain. And funny enough, Pulse Chain is not correlated to Ethereum price over the full 537 days it's been since launch. So in other words, ETH price has not had any bearing on what Pulse Chain does. And you can kind of see that because depending on it doesn't matter what ETH's doing. Sometimes Pulse just goes parabolic, and sometimes it just tanks like crazy for like 16 weeks. Yeah. And then you get like these massive spikes in both and so what that's telling me is it reminds me of early Hex, where Hex would just bleed against Ethereum for a long time, and then all of a sudden you get a big spike, and then it would bleed against Ethereum, and then it would get a big spike, and that all set up for a range, and then that range would squish down, and you'd get this huge move that would go parabolic, and it would break all the all-time highs and go like many X's above. So we're kind of in that it's that period that feels big right now, but it'll compress down, and you'll get this huge move out of here eventually. So far.
Oops.
Sorry, you're good.
Sorry about that. I just want to put that up on the screen for you. I didn't know it was going to auto play. Sorry about that.
We can show that at the end.
Okay.
So yeah, that correlation is interesting because it's basically saying like, look, if ETH's going to go down farther from here, it doesn't necessarily mean that Pulse has to go down farther. That's what that means. It's like, if ETH goes up from here, it doesn't necessarily mean Pulse is just going to go straight up with it. So there is going to be like a counter play there possible where people will probably be rotating in and out of ETH and Pulse. So timing wise, yeah, it's going to happen probably next year. You're going to start to really see some big movements. I do believe that in terms of the OA's participation in Pulse Chain and the SAC wallets, it's going to happen after ETH gets back above $4,000 or $5,000. You're not going to probably see that so much until then. But that doesn't mean that we can't go break SAC right on our own either, because we've kind of seen off the lows how nicely we're able to set that bottom in and get a big move. So,
wow. Well, it's going to be an exciting year. I feel like it's going to start tonight at 7 p.m. when we start seeing the returns on the election, is kind of get a feel for where things are headed. Any predictions on the election tonight?
I mean, I'd like to see a Trump victory. I think that would be what's best for cryptocurrency. So I'm kind of like a single issue voter, if you want to say.
Yeah.
And whether or not we have to wait a little longer or if we get a clear and concise victory tonight, I don't know. I thought one thing last time, and and it didn't happen. So I think we'll get a Trump win tonight.
Yeah. I sense that we will. I think that we're going to see some surprises. I think things have been propped up by the mainstream media as this narrative to just try to get Kamala to hang on. But I do think we're going to be shocked. It feels like there's an opportunity here, because when I look out there, Trump on his own, I think the moment for me was when he got shot, and that was that moment where that's the thing that got Elon Musk in. But when you look at this kind of group of people, and it not be ideological, but be more populist, Vivek Ramaswamy, JD Vance, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and of course Elon Musk. This is, you're really not just voting for Donald Trump.
That's right.
There's not a team around Kamala that you could even count on or even consider to be sharp. So it's really the Obama fourth presidency, if you will.
I appreciate that you're able to speak freely to that, and give the world your message, because most people, they hole up and they don't want to say what they see. It's tough, man. You don't want to get blasted off of YouTube for speaking your mind. So
yeah, we'll see. There may be ramifications of that, but we'll see.
So I have one of my members actually is working on an election site in Northeast Pennsylvania right now.
Oh,
and,
really?
He said that it's been busy all morning and the lines were out the door, and that's not normal for his site. And so he said independents are turning out the most I've seen at this site. So look, guys, this is definitely not normal. There's going to be a portion of American citizens that's not going to like what I'm about to say, but really, I think when you're voting Republican this time, you're voting for American ideals, and if you're not voting, you're voting for the worst. Like that's basically where I'm at with it. And I mean, people are going to say what they're going to feel and say about that, but I mean,
what was shocking everywhere. Yeah, what was shocking to me was Tucker Carlson had Paul Manafort. He was the campaign manager the first time for Trump for a very short time, and they put him in jail. And Tucker had him on, and he was basically describing the fact that when all this went down, when Schumer and Pelosi and Obama basically came to Biden and said, "Hey, you're not running for president," basically a coup, their intention was to go to the DNC, convention and actually have a primary there where the, electors would, vote for who they wanted to be the presidential candidate. And basically it had pissed off Biden so bad that he immediately went the next day, got on the mic and basically said Kamala is the next president. In a way, that was the gift that was handed to. And, I don't know if you've seen Biden with the Trump hat, but I think that they went too far with him. And of course, I think the people around him, like his wife and such, is they got bullied and there was a coup. And he basically said, the only thing I've got is the bully pulpit to basically say, all right, I know Kamala can't win against Trump, and so I'm going to hand it to him. And that, to have Paul Manafort say that, and that's kind of the internal thinking, was really kind of a shock to me, because I didn't, they point out this coup and such, but I think we're going to be shocked. It feels like I'm old enough to know Morning in America and Reagan, and there's the 80 election and then the 84 election, and I was young at that time, but I remember that kind of the impacts of that, right? And just how people felt, and how they had a different type of optimism. I think that if that does happen, that we're going to see, significant optimism. And I think that that's going to loosen up, liquidity in the markets. I think we're going to see a lot more building. I think we're going to see lower regulations. We're certainly going to see a reduction in prices of things that impact everyone, like fuel and such, and energy itself. But I'm very hopeful that we get an opportunity here to see this. I think it drives crypto, really truly to the moon. So I think this is going to be a really special cycle.
I think too, you get, if in this case, you get like a completely overhauled government that's more efficient. I think that you got a new health. It's going to put pressure on the healthcare system to fix their shit, and the food, where we're getting our food in America. And that's all going to be positive. That's going to have decades long downstream effects that are going to be positive for this country. As well as you said energy, and then there was one other thing. as well. That would taxation. Like, so there's he's got some pretty good tax policies that he wants to push through, and even abolishment of income tax potentially. So that, I mean, that's a big
Can you imagine that?
And what you can do is, and this has happened in the past, I think it was in the 1890s, you could put that pressure on other countries through tariffs.
Tariffs, yeah.
And that's saying nothing about the fact that they just print money out of thin air anyways. So like, why aren't they just debasing it at like the extra 3% at the whatever let's say the national tax income each year is like $3 trillion right now. Let's just say it's that. I don't know how much it is. You might as well, like, they printed like 18 trillion or something like that in 2020. So why not just print the extra 3 trillion and debase our currency, and don't take our money away directly? Like, what? Because that would collapse the Ponzi, because you get the same money could be taxed an infinite number of times. So anyway, this whole system needs an overhaul big time, and that's partly why we're here in crypto, right? Just try to stick it to the man. So
well, Axis, here's the thing that's cool. You're in the title of this video, and there's 324 people here. This feels like, last cycle when we were at the top of the bull run, there was maybe 225 to 250 on a typical stream. For us to be over 324 right now, and then to have the streams where you were on that just went bananas, 1600, 2100. There are people paying attention, and I appreciate what you bring to the table. You're doing this, obviously, it's strategic, but also you're a very, very good representative, because what I want to see is when people are seeing the pulse chain for the first time, or seeing these things, they're seeing smart people that are respectful, thoughtful, and that's not everybody in our community, but I just really appreciate what you're doing and the approach that you take, and it's been certainly beneficial to me in many ways. Learned a lot from you, and I want to encourage you. I'm a big fan. I know that you've got a lot of folks that really value your opinion, but you've built a community of your own that I think is special. So I really appreciate all that you do.
I see Corky in the chat. Is that Corky.tech, the guy that created dude, bring me some histogram data for Pulse Chain, my dude, if you're out there. Hey, I really appreciate you for having me on, and for all the nice remarks, and for the community, the Hexicans that have been supporting me for going on 4 years now, and giving me a platform to build off of and grow. And the building has just begun, and I have a lot of big plans about how to bring value to and create value and bring adoption to Pulse Chain. And so you're about to see this video. This has never been seen before on the internet, but this is a first look at the AxisALive fusion, which pays homage to the HexCom fusion, which is a way that we think we can solve for the demand issue to bring in some crazy adoption to Hex long term. So Crypto Heartbeat, thanks for having me on, and we always have good chemistry and can chop it up. So happy to do it again soon. Yeah,
let's do that. I think there's going to be a lot of really big news for us to talk about, and I think having your commentary is priceless. So yeah, well, I'll pull us out here, and we'll finish up with this video. Thanks, man.
Right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.